The child in the sweatshop that made your shoes. Every time we went to war to fight our evil foes, they told you we were really fighting for the good of CEOs. If you could feel the hunger of the many, see the riches of the few, if they told it like it is, what if you knew?
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese. We got a great show today.
That's right.
A positive show.
Very positive. We're going to talk about the transition to the new clean energy economy.
A new economic democracy. Very
That's
exciting.
right. Both of those. So first, let's start with some news. Two things. One is Turkey.
Turkey.
Yeah, very exciting what's happening
Shows
there.
how unpredictable resistance movements can be. You know, they threaten to cut a few trees down, and suddenly there's a revolt.
Yeah.
Nationwide, worldwide revolt against Turkey for, threatening to cut some trees down.
Yeah, well, of course, things have been building for a while.
I guess there's more to it.
Exactly. And finally, you never know what's going to be the last straw that really sparks protest.
Yeah, so we in fact, we had an article last week on Alternet about that, and how we have to be very prepared for the inevitable unpredictability
of a mass movement.
And I think this week we have an article in Truth Out, which tries to help people get prepared by talking about what kind of strategy can work. So that's coming out Wednesday.
Right, and those can both be found on clearingthefogradio.org. Also, our new website, popularresistance.org, has a lot of information and materials for people that are interested in getting involved and getting prepared for what's inevitably going to come. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
That's right.
But let's also quickly mention Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden? I never heard of him before.
My newest hero.
It's amazing how, he has such a good interview he did with Glenn Greenwald, not wanting to be in the spotlight, and why he put aside his $200,000 a year salary and his
nice
house in Hawaii, and his giving everything up to do the patriotic thing. I loved Glenn Greenwald's tweet where he says, "Dear DOJ, your bullying tactics will scare some sources, but will embolden others."
That's right.
I mean, you think of since over 3 years ago when Bradley Manning was being made an example of. Think of all the leaks that have happened since then.
Yeah.
Does the Obama administration get it?
It's not going to stop.
You're not going to scare people. If there are a lot of if you scare 10 people, all you need is one to say, "I'm going to leak it."
Do what's right.
What's right. Someone will be patriotic. And so if you have a 100-to-1 ratio of people scared and one coming forward, that one coming forward is going to do more damage than those 100 who are afraid.
Well, damage or good by bringing things into the light
Damage
for us.
Damage to their leaky dam of leaks.
Right. So there's a solidarity rally today in New York City with Edward Snowden called I Stand with Edward Snowden, and it's going to be at Union Square at noontime. You can get more details at popularresistance.org. But let's move on to our show because we have two great guests. Really excited to talk with Gar Alperovitz, who we've been seeing a lot lately. We were just at the public banking conference, and this is a new public banking OcuCard at ocucards.com, and we saw him just over the weekend.
We're seeing him a lot because he has a great new book out,
That's
What
right.
Then Must We Do, which really is a kind of a bookend to his last book that he just released again, America Beyond Capitalism. This is how we get there.
Exactly,
It's a
that's what we want to
strategy
talk
book,
about.
which
So
is a fun one.
Gar's full bio is on clearingthefogradio.org, but let me mention that he has had a distinguished career as a historian, political economist, activist, writer, and government official, and we're very excited to speak with you this morning, Gar. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Great to be with you guys.
So the first question we kind of wanted to have you answer is, can you tell our listeners whether you believe that we're in the midst of an economic democracy transformation?
I think we are in the midst of laying the groundwork for a real transformation. Whether we do it depends upon whether individuals actually rise to the occasion, like Snowden rising to the occasion. There is so much going on around the country that can move in the direction of laying groundwork for a powerful economic and political transformation. And as you know, the book's all about the hundreds and indeed thousands of worker-owned companies around the country, the co-ops, what's happening in healthcare that over time can move in another direction.
Uh-oh, what's that? Okay, good.
I'm not
Keep
sure
going.
what that was.
Whatever it was, it stopped.
I must have been excited about that.
Yeah, love what I said.
It's always nice to have a score with your talk. Keep going.
Just at the right moment. I was saying that there's so much going on that we're laying groundwork for something big, and then the crescendo happened. Well,
Exactly.
that's the idea, really.
And you often mention 130 million people?
Americans are involved in co-ops or credit unions.
The thing is that the press simply doesn't report on this. It not only isn't interested, but it's so financially weak at the local level now, and it's so corporate dominated that they just don't report on things that are going on all over the country. Yet there are, in fact, 130 million Americans who are members of one kind or another co-op. People just don't know that, and the numbers are expanding rapidly.
Right.
And a good part of that is credit unions. And credit unions, they exist. They're one-person, one-vote banks. There they are, right out there, democratic banks. They can be taken over and moved to, some of them are very cautious and conservative. They've been standing around for a long time, but they're one-person, one-vote banks, and no one goes to the board meetings or the annual meetings. But in some parts of the country, activists are getting very interested in electing their own people. In Jackson, Mississippi, they're using it for very creative, more progressive economic activities. In western Massachusetts, they've also discovered the light bulb's gone on. Here they are. If you put the credit unions together, one-vote, one-person banks, they've got as much capital as any of the big five New York banks. It's extraordinary. It's just sitting there and can be revitalized and used to, for instance, to finance worker-owned companies and other co-ops. So there's a lot of possibilities that people are just beginning to discover. And the book, what they must do, is just filled with trying to report on all of this and how it's been building up and laying groundwork for something bigger, I think.
Now, we say one person, one vote. That means if you have a bank account or a checking account, you get a vote. I mean, that's so right. it's and you can go to the shareholder meeting and you can elect the board that you want, and you can get a group of people together to organize that and make it happen.
Yep.
Now, your book, your subhead is Straight Talk About the Next American Revolution. Do you see what's going on? I mean, you say it's at the early stages. That depends if people get involved and continue to build it. But if assuming what we're talking about happens, assuming there's an economic democracy movement that really develops and starts to broaden, do you see that really as a revolution, or is that just tinkering at the edges of big finance capitalism?
Well, that is the question of the next couple decades. I mean, and I think what I think is happening is that there is an enormous amount going on around the country in different areas. We just talked about co-ops. We could talk about land trusts, which are land trusts is a public or quasi-public or socialized form of owning land. They're all over the country now. They used to be not existent, but either nonprofit ownership or government ownership. There's city developments where cities are going into business. Public enterprises. 25% of American electricity is currently produced by public ownership utilities or co-ops, and some of the utilities are being taken over and switched now. And over the last, I think there have been 16 over the last decade. So there's a process going on, which, if it continues in virtually every major area at the grassroots level and at the state and local level, is moving quietly in the direction of down-home, very American, very practical, changing who gets to own capital. The current number is at 400 people have 100 more capital than the bottom 180 million. I mean, it's an extraordinary number.
That number keeps going up.
Well, as the stock market rises.
It's extraordinary. Somebody put it to me the other day. You could put all the 400 people in one big airplane, and they've got more capital in that airplane
than more than half the country.
It's really extraordinary.
Wow.
So either we democratize ownership, or that continues. And what's interesting is that the pressures and the really de facto 15% unemployment that we've got,
that's right,
the pain levels, people are being forced to come, and they are doing it, but the press doesn't report it. They're beginning to develop a very decentralized vision of how to change ownership. Co-ops are the most obvious, but there are many, as I say, 10 million people in worker-owned companies that people don't know about. So that process, if it continues, and the argument of the book is that it is likely to continue because we are likely to see an ongoing stalemate at the national level, stagnation, decay, more pain, but also not the traditional collapse scenario. And there are good reasons for that. But this kind of a context really forces people over to think and rethink and learn and either do something new,
right,
or the pain continues. So I think that's where we are. And then the role of activism and political activism as opposed to institution building, and they've got to go hand in hand. You got to walk on two legs, is to begin to move the ball and begin to say, challenge at the local level and the state level and the national level to move some of this into the political arena that's just beginning to develop institutionally. And I think that's the argument of the book, that it's time for us to get serious about this once you know what's going on. and begin to accelerate it and make it part of a larger strategy.
So before we get into some of the specifics you talk about what we must do as far as the various strategies, the checkerboarding and such, I wanted to get more detail on your thoughts on how the activism relates to the building, because Margaret and I always argue that you have to do it's a two-track process. Stop the machine, create the new world. Create the new world is what we're talking about, mainly of economic democracy, putting in place new economic institutions, empowering people, sharing wealth better. The stop the machine part, in addition to the kind of lobbying you talk about, it's also the people in the streets, resistance, civil disobedience, non-cooperation. How do you see that playing with the creation part?
Well, I think there's a third element. So there is also political boosting and accelerating and driving for the new stuff. So there's three parts. One is creating a co-op. You can go do that tomorrow in your community, or you can create a land trust, or you can begin to build out in various concrete ways that the book What Then Must We Do just lays out what's going on around the country. That's just doing it.
Right.
And then there is the second part is, and I'll come back to your question. The second part is beginning to build a politics to support it.
Right.
And because that means getting the city government in many cities are helping worker-owned companies.
Right.
And land trusts. The city government can do all that.
And FDR helped a great deal with agricultural cooperatives and public utilities.
And people
in a New Deal. So you saw that aspect in that history.
Yeah, and people are pushing around the country for participatory budgeting.
That's right.
Which is
right.
another way of kind of
getting
some local power.
Exactly. That's a political movement in support of the new direction. Mm-hmm. So this first step is building stuff. We're just doing it. And then what we're talking about here is political support, and in many parts of the country, there's a lot of things going on in healthcare. 20 states have introduced legislation to replicate the Bank of North Dakota, which is a state-owned bank, and 20 states have introduced single-payer healthcare legislation. So there's a whole series of things that can be done, and I try to write about in the book. That's the second level, and the third level is stop the machine.
Right.
And that's a whole other, and you've got to do all three. So, that's the main focus of this book is, because people don't know about it, is try to say, look, there is a whole democratic ownership process at work, which gives us a vision of a system that takes us beyond state socialism and beyond corporate capitalism, and is a very American vision. But it goes to the heart of the question of who gets to own the system,
right,
in a way that it's decentralized rather than centralized, in a way that's very. It's all very. The thing that's important, I think people don't quite get, is that a lot of left talk gets very abstract and it's a very kind of European language. This is a very American stuff.
Right.
It goes to the heart of who gets to own the system.
That's right.
But it can be talked about, and is being talked about, and must be talked about with ordinary folks who are not left radicals, but who understand once you talk about it, let's do it.
Right.
That's right. We have to take a break, but I want to point people to an article on popularresistance.org. We have a highlighted article about Gar's work, his last two books, as well as another author's a book about Beyond Capitalism as well. And it goes through a very specific, it's a book, the title is, by the way, for our website, it's a realistic, radical remaking of the economy. And it's by Lyle Jeremy Rubin from Dissent magazine. And it goes through a very specific agenda of what we need to do as far as a political reform program goes. And so people want to get more detail on that, they can get it there. But we're going to have to take a break right now. We'll come back and talk with Gar about what he sees as the next steps, the various strategies we can use to advance this cause.
And we're going to go into this break with a song by Jesse Colin Young called Get Together. Nice upbeat song.
Love is but a song we sing, feels the way we die. People, you can make the mountains ring now, or make the angels cry. Oh, the bird is on the wing now, you may not know why.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
June 27th is National HIV Testing Day.
HIV testing is fast, painless, and often free.
I've been tested for HIV.
I've been tested for HIV. Have you? To find an HIV testing center near you, visit greaterthan.org.
Hi, this is Chris Hedges, and when I'm in Washington, I don't want my news filtered through corporate sponsors. I want to hear the truth, which is why I listen to DC's only independent radio station, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC, Washington's progressive working community. We Act Radio, do something.
I get to be a rocker.
Yes, you do. You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Colin Young. Kevin Zeese.
And our topic today is transitioning to the new economy. And I forgot to mention our first guest is Gar Alperovitz, who is also the new economy advisor to the president in the Green Shadow Cabinet.
Right.
So, Gar, one of the terms that you use in your new book, What Then Must We Do, is evolutionary reconstruction. Could you just define that for our listeners?
Yeah, thanks for asking that part. Traditionally, liberalism has assumed corporate capitalism will be here forever, and then it tries to mop up around the edges. That is, regulate, get for the environment, the tax, and then try to redistribute. Et cetera, use incentives to get the corporation to come into a city and so forth. That's the model. In the United States, we call it liberalism. In Europe, it's social democracy. Or the model of, quote, reform. And that's the model many of us were brought up with, which is in radical decay. It's disintegrating. The corporations now are overpowering in just about every place you look. And the evidence is in the long trends of income distribution getting worse, wealth distribution getting worse, environmental trends, CO2 production, climate change, number of people in prison, and I lay this out in What Then Must We Do, the long trends tell you that system of letting the corporations and the 400 at the top own things and trying to reform it is simply no longer working. Right? And one major reason is that it always worked only partially. One major reason is labor unions, which are the heart of the power of that system, are gone down from 35% to about 11% in the overall, and about 6% in the private sector, and they're declining as a power base. Revolution assumed that there would be a collapse, and the collapse would precipitate a revolution that would take over and change the system institutionally. Nationalizing a Marxist revolution would produce a socialist nationalization. People forgot that often the crisis produced a right-wing takeover, not a left-wing takeover. But that's what revolution was about. Well, in the emerging context, what I think we're seeing is something different. That is to say, it is evolving change that does change who gets to own the means of production. That's a worker-owned company, for instance, who owns land trust, for instance, who owns public power, cities and localities and even neighborhoods. And indeed, the healthcare system, piece by piece, we may see that moving to single payer by the states over time as the pain levels increase. The banking system, or many states are trying to piece by piece do what North Dakota's been doing for 90 years, a state-owned bank. Many cities are trying to do things like that. So what you are getting is the basis of institutional change, democratizing ownership. That is a revolutionary notion, but it's evolving, so you need a new language for it. So the language I use is evolutionary reconstruction. Mm-hmm. We are reconstructing. Now, this is all, in a way, prehistory is what I write about in the book. If you think about the New Deal, a lot of what happened in the New Deal was developed first at the state and local level where the pain levels were highest, and had to build for a long time before it could be moved to the national level.
Yes, some was the agenda of the third parties and the teens, the Bull Moose and the independent and the socialist parties. They kind of laid out the New Deal 20 years before it happened.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's the way to think about this time, in my view. And that's the argument of the book, that we are in the prehistory of the next great change. And if you're aware of that and try to understand that, then there's a hell of a lot that can be done, and people are beginning to do all over the country, that instead of being a project here and a fragment there, we can build it. The movement is already building. It's not self-aware of itself.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
To see that
it's so important to label something like this. Evolutionary reconstruction is a great term, because I think the way that we have this, the government set up and the economy set up right now with all the automatic stabilizers, the protection of bank accounts, and all the insurance policies and such, revolution and collapse is not likely. Collapse is not likely, so revolution is not likely. What's going to happen is a gradual decay, increasing suffering, new alternatives developing, people developing resistance, with politics starting to change. So it's an evolutionary process rather than a revolutionary one. That's a pretty interesting distinction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's critical, because as soon as people begin to understand just what you said, then they can see themselves as part of a very important movement,
right?
Like, laying groundwork and building and building. And, another way to think about it is, at the end of the 19th century, women fought state by state by state by state, agonizingly for decades, laying groundwork until finally they moved into the national level for the vote. And that's the process. Hopefully, it would be quicker.
Now let me get back to your book here. Now, related to this concept of evolution is one of the strategies you put forward. You call checkerboarding. Why don't you talk about that a little bit so people get a sense of how that can work around the country?
Yeah, it's very interesting, because people can focus at the national level, and the press keeps oversimplifying. That's the right wing controls everything. You can't move the ball. Congress is dead. Yes, indeed, it is controlled. But if you actually look at specific states, and that's why I say there's a checkerboard. Many states you can really move the ball, and while the right wing controls certain states and conditions get worse in those states, it is eminently possible in other states to begin to build up a whole different alternative strategy. I mean, healthcare is one part of it. In Vermont, they're going to single payer soon. Banking is another part of it. As I said, 20 states are looking at trying to do what North Dakota's done. Mm-hmm. In many cities, there are land trusts, large-scale land trusts in many cities that are building up and showing that you don't have to let the developer take all the profits. Mm-hmm. In many other cities on the checkerboard, even as the other side disintegrates their part of the checkerboard by right-wing tactics, we can build up in other places examples, and indeed surround them and circle them with positive examples of what works best. So once you break down these, a lot of folks on the left have huge abstractions and been taught to think very abstractly, but if you break it down and start looking at what's possible on the ground, there's an enormous amount of strategic opening to build over time, that laying groundwork of this kind in certain states and certain cities.
And really, that kind of checkerboarding is really how change has happened so often in this country, because Brandeis's states are laboratories for experiments and new policies. That's pretty much what you're talking about. I mean, and that's really happened on issue after issue over the course of history, as you see these local and state level changes. Then you see it all, have neighboring states doing it, and the one next to me on the other side is doing it. Why aren't we doing it? We're surrounded by this change, but we're not putting it in place. What's wrong with our government? And gradually get to a national.
Well, once you show that it's working, then at the national level, there's no excuse.
Exactly.
That's right. And also, that's the positive side of it. But I do want to, it's implicit what you said, but just as they go forward with their policies in the next state and people feel the pain, and then look over at the border and see what can be done elsewhere, That's a really interesting way to think about, how we move forward, because it's not only that we can build up things positively in many, many states, and are so doing. We are doing it.
Right.
That's what the book is all about, all the things going on that's not covered by the press. But on the other hand, they're getting worse. So I think,
and frankly, that people should know that can happen at the community level too. If your neighborhood's doing something, or one city's doing something, the next city's not, you can have the same thing within a state as well as state level.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing you talk about, though, you go beyond that in your book. You talk about a couple things I wanted to get your thoughts on. One was crisis transformation, and this relates to the issue of not just like local change, but nationalization of some industries. So why don't you talk a little about that?
Yeah, there's several processes going on. That is, there's a lot of possibilities at the state level, the co-ops and worker-owned companies and land trusts and et cetera, public banks. Mm-hmm. But there are also, quite separately, and again, it's important to get away from abstraction. The banking industry is in crisis.
That's
and
right.
Almost every expert, left, right, and center, predicts almost with certainty there will be more big banking crises. They are larger now and more overextended now than they were before the last crisis. So when the next crisis hits, probably there'll be a big political reaction, and that's a crisis-driven thing. That's not building up from the ground slowly, step by step, the way we're checkerboarding.
Right.
And then the question is what happens. Most likely what will happen at some point is what the liberals are now calling for, which is break them up. Instead of make the big banks broken up so they won't be too big to fail.
Right.
Okay, let's assume that happens, which I think is likely. Sherrod Brown's got legislation to do that. Then what's going to happen for sure is they will regroup. Like AT&T and Standard Oil, the big fish will eat the little fish and we'll be back in the same situation in another decade. At some point, I think that's going to be open to real challenge once we run through the failures. And what I think that means is at some point you turn, we actually did de facto basically nationalize the banks. We didn't take voting power, but we put enough capital into
That's
it,
right.
nationalize
Yeah.
it.
That's right.
A lot.
And we still own AIG overwhelmingly, which is the
Right.
largest insurance company in the world, and a huge financial institution. So at some point, particularly if we learn the practical messages by state banking, like the Bank of North Dakota, and we learn enough and develop our own ideas enough at the state and local level, then I think at some point we'll be in position to say those banks ought to remain in the public interest. And there is no, the conservatives at the Chicago School of Economics pointed this out. There is no alternative. You can't regulate them. They're too powerful to regulate. And when you break them up, they get back together. This is the conservative argument. So they argued in many cases, some corporations, the only thing you could do is nationalization. And they were right about that, and we need to bring that argument back.
And you see the same thing in healthcare. We don't have time to go into it now, but you see the same thing in healthcare, and then the same kind of crisis. It's a big part of our economy, about 18% of the economy. You see the Obamacare approach is unfortunately just building on the failed insurance-based system, and the underinsurance and the lack of insurance completely is going to continue. And in fact, the underinsurance will get worse, and so we're going to see a crisis there too. Right. Gar, we hope you're working on another book, because I always love your books, and so hope you're already starting your next one. Margaret and I are going to do, as we do every Wednesday, a in-depth discussion of this radio show. We'll talk about Joel Magnuson, our next guest, who talks about transition towns and the coming great transformation. And we'll be going much more in depth into what you've written about, as well as related topics. So next Wednesday we'll get much more detail on truth out about this, and we really appreciate your work.
Great. Okay, good to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much for spending time with us, and let's not go out without mentioning your website, which is community-wealth.org.
That's one website. Just put Gar Alperovitz in your search engine. You'll find some great websites with all of his thinking.
If you can spell it.
Well, it's on our website, clearingthefogradio.org. We have links to your book and websites.
It spells just like it sounds, Alperovitz.
With the O, or what then must you do, because that's a little easier to spell.
That's true.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you for taking time to join us, and we're going to go into this break with a song by Tracy Chapman called Talking About a Revolution, because talking about evolutionary reconstruction is not musical.
I get to be a soprano?
Poor people gonna rise up, get theirs, yeah. Poor people gonna rise up, take what's theirs.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
This is Kimon Freeman. host of Speak Easy and co-founder of We Act Radio. Suicide is a very serious problem in today's challenging world, whether with our troops abroad or with everyday citizens within our own society. Before you take your life into your own hands, tie a knot at the end of your rope and call the suicide hotline toll-free at 1-855-320-LIFE. That's 1-855-320-LIFE. It may just be the most important call you ever make. You talk, we listen, and together we survive.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
I speak from Pennsylvania's death row.
A bright, shiny, highly mechanized hell.
Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the lost souls of the revolution.
And they're trying to figure out how to shut him down entirely.
They have moved heaven and earth to stop his voice being heard in the United States.
When you talk about groups that are maligned and slurred as terrorists in the major media, they're really small fry. They're retail terrorists. Wholesale terrorists are the United States government.
The whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to.
On the move. This is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Hi, I'm Tom Morello. Some call me the Night Watchman. In the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal is at a crucial stage. Please go to freemumia.com to find out more information about how you can help Mumia Abu-Jamal and other political prisoners. Night Watchman out.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
It's finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about the revolution. It's finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution. Oh, no. Talking about a revolution.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
Kevin Z's here too.
And we're talking today about the transition to the new economy. We just had our first segment with Gar Alperovitz, who wrote the new book, What Then Must We Do? Straight Talk about the Next American Revolution. And the next segment of this show, we wanted to speak with Joel Magnuson.
Who we're trying to reach.
Who we're trying to reach on the telephone right now. He's out in Portland, Oregon.
But economic democracy is something that we work a lot on, and we have a website devoted to it called It's Our Economy. The website's itsoureconomy.us, and we go through, if you're under the issues there, we just lay out what economic democracy is. A lot of people don't really understand it yet, but it basically means giving power to people in the economy, so that rather than a situation we currently have right now, where employers can hire or fire for no reason or any reason, you have worker-owned cooperatives where workers actually own
They make the decisions.
Or you have a situation where an employer wants to go to get cheap labor in India or some other country, China or wherever, and instead the employers who own the company say, no, we're going to keep it here and make it work.
Right. Much more, hopefully, community investment. I mean, that's the real goal of a worker cooperative, is that it's part of the community, and so its interest is also a social interest.
And that's just one of many examples of how we create economies that work more for people than work just for Wall Street. And that's really the problem we have right now, is a Wall Street-based economy that funnels money to Wall Street, or a big box economy that funnels money to Arkansas, where Walmart has its headquarters, and sucks money out of the local economy.
Just picture anytime you go to a big box store, you're just sucking money out of your own community. One thing that we didn't get into during the last segment was the kind of the role, the relationship between the economy and political power. Because what I think this struggle, this democratization of the economy, is also part of the greater struggle globally, and this is happening globally, of creating a real democracy versus what we call in this country a mirage or a managed democracy.
Yeah. One thing to build the resistance movement, to build the movement for transformational change, we have to build our power.
Right.
And power is a number of different things. Of course, there's people power.
Right. We have the numbers.
We have the numbers, and if we can organize and mobilize people, that's a tremendous step forward on building power. But there's also money power, and if we can begin to develop ways to share the wealth, more equitably through economic democracy, and communities can start to build their own wealth,
right,
then they develop that kind of power, which can play in politics as well as in their daily lives.
Yeah, I think what Gar writes about in his previous book, which is America Beyond Capitalism, is that you can't have democracy in a situation of extreme wealth inequality, because the people who have the money, and he talked about the top 400 families, the 400 wealthiest people, have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 180 million
Or you can look at it
Americans.
from the Walmart perspective. The 6 Walmart heirs have the wealth of 30 million Americans.
Right. So in that kind of a situation, those people just naturally have more political power than the rest of us. But by creating democratic economic institutions locally, we start to take some of that economic power back and reduce that wealth divide, while at the same time starting to meet our needs. And that starts to, over time, shift that political power.
Yeah, because once you start to develop community projects that are building wealth in the community, whether it's co-ops or farmers markets, then you also start to reach out to your political leadership and say, we need laws to help protect that farmers market.
Right.
We need laws to help protect that co-op, to let that co-op flourish. And so what you have right now is the 400 wealthiest, the 1%, the top 0.5%, influencing the economy for their own benefit.
Right.
And so we see in this kind of so-called recovery that we're in, which is not really a recovery, but the media calls a recovery,
Right.
127% of the income during the recovery going to 1%.
Right. And for the bottom 99%, it's actually a loss.
That's
So
why
that's why we call it a fake recovery.
That's why it's more than 100% recovery for the 1%, because they're
Right.
taking not only the income that's existing, but they're taking income from in fact, we saw a decline in income in the last quarter, a 5% decline in the minimum wage and in the wages people are earning.
Mhm.
It's so you're seeing this continuing downtrend for the most Americans, and an uptrend for the wealthiest, and those are not unrelated. The fact that this time in history is a time when the workers have the smallest percent of the GDP that we've had in recorded history, really shows why we're seeing this kind of expanding wealth divide that's ongoing and resulting in the wealthiest getting more political power, more economic power, more income, and the poorest really, and not just the poorest, the middle class shrinking and getting poorer. And the largest source of poverty now is the working poor. People are actually working more than one job, still living in poverty.
Right, right. But with crisis also comes opportunities for change. And I think that's what's very exciting, is that a lot of these crises are starting to bring communities together when they say, hey, there's something going on here. What can we do about it? And that's some of what Gar writes about, and also what Joel Magnuson writes about in his new book. I'm just going to show it to you. It's The Approaching Great Transformation Toward a Livable Post-Carbon Economy, and hopefully we'll be able to get him on the phone. But he talks a lot about the transition town concept, and these are towns that are taking it upon themselves to start transitioning to this post-carbon economy, because it has to happen. I mean, we're in peak fossil fuel, and so this change is coming.
And what's interesting about something like the transition town and the stuff that Gar talks about too is these are not something that's just happened as a result of the collapse, the most recent collapse. They've been going on really since the end of the last century. You've seen a spark in all of these economic democracy activities. Transition towns, as we'll hear, came at the beginning of the century and of this current century,
right,
before the collapse happened, and so these are developing roots.
Right.
And what's interesting also about these kind of community, which with transition towns, basically communities working together,
right,
in a solidarity economy. The economic democracy is the cooperatives and a people-owned economy. These have happened throughout our history,
right,
at different times.
Right.
We've done shows and articles about the long history of cooperative and community work, so that we see actually that this is almost in the DNA of,
right,
of the American culture.
Right, absolutely. And what's with that also, when we see this rise in people pushing for more democratic institutions, including the economy, but other things as well, that has also mirrored the rise of social transformation in this country. So they really go hand in hand. And we often talk about the concept of being in the midst of a great turning, and that's something that's been going on as well for a number
more than 12, 13 years now.
Right.
The idea of a great turning is people saw the end of the current carbon nuclear energy economy. They saw the end of the Wall Street domination. They could see the problems in the big banks and the corruption in the economy. They could see the wealth divide developing. All these problems coming together at once, the ecological crisis, of course, the climate change, the toxicity, the food crisis, all these crises coming together at once. Transformation is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And people are calling that the Great Turning. The Great Turning is the concept of moving from this kind of dog-eat-dog, capitalist-based economy where there's competitive and someone wins and everyone else loses, a monopoly game of economy where someone gets it all and everyone else gets nothing, and the game ends in a disaster for everybody except one person, toward a cooperative economy where communities actually work together, join together, to create an economy that works for everybody. And sometimes it's outside of the monetary system. Mm-hmm. You know, like the idea of time banks. Right. We've had Edgar Kahn on, who's a D.C. lawyer, social justice activist, who created the concept of time banks. And it's the idea that every person has value. In the community, right. In the community. And whether that value is babysitting for someone while they go shopping, or teaching someone to learn, or doing carpentry, or doing brain surgery. Everyone has a value to the community, and we need to recognize that value, whether it's inside the traditional economy or outside it, where you volunteer your time and you get credit for that time, and then you can get, with those credits, you can get the time from other people in the community to do what you need to have done in your life.
Well, that does two kind of things. I mean, one is that time banking acknowledges what you alluded to, the non-market economy, which actually keeps our society functioning. We so often only value the things that people do for money, but there's a lot that's happening in a community that's not paid work, but actually keeps that community functioning. And it also changes the interaction between people. So some people really don't like to feel disempowered. I mean, I think most people don't like to feel disempowered, that they're always having to take, and that they have nothing to give. That really, I think, starts to eat away at your self-esteem. And what the time bank does is it evens that exchange. Any services that you're receiving, you're doing that because you gave some services, you got those time dollars, and now you're receiving services for your work. So it's
a very social justice oriented approach.
Yeah, and that's the other exciting thing about the Great Turning, is that there's been a lot of efforts at social transformation in our country, but it's all been done kind of within this continued system, current economic and political system that we have. And so we've never really changed things dramatically. We have little bits of change, but it hasn't really broken out of this kind of dog-eat-dog competitive type of society. So the Great Turning is about evolving to another level that actually is based on more human values.
And what's interesting about it too is, of course, it's happening. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen. The crises of the Wall Street banks, the crises of energy, the crisis of ecology, the crisis of poverty and the wealth divide, these are all going to have to be dealt with. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be forced on being dealt with. I think the Occupy movement and the other protest movements that we're seeing around the country on low-wage workers, on Walmart workers, on the extraction economy, the tar sands, the mountain tar removal, the offshore oil, the uranium mining, the efforts to close down nuclear, all this that's going on is the kind of the political side of facing reality. Yeah. That the reality is hitting us in the face, and we have to deal with it. The government is very dysfunctional behind. They are Gar mentioned the three-legged stool of political change, resistance, and building. The building and resistance are developing, but the government is so out of step with both and without what people want. And that's what's really holding back change is the dysfunctional and corrupt government right now. And so that hopefully we can get that leg caught up with them as these other two develop.
Yeah. No. So it's time for our break. Okay. So we're going to go into this break with a song called "Alternative Energy," and we'll continue to try to get Joel Magnuson on the phone.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Making a change, that's what we're fighting for. Our Mother Earth is dying. Can't you hear how nature crying? We need to use renewable energy. Polluting the air and water. This thing shouldn't last much longer. We need to use renewable energy.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
You're listening to WPWC, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
I'm Mayor Bill Ewell. Did you know that 1 in 6 children in our country is obese? Being overweight puts kids at risk for high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and many other diseases. Let's encourage kids in Alexandria to engage in healthy, balanced, and active lifestyles. Reduce their time in front of the TV or computer and get physically active. And we can set an example by being active with them. For more information on preventing childhood obesity, visit usmayors.org/childhood obesity.
Brought to you by the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the American Beverage Association.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Hi, I'm Patrick Ewing. I'm here giving something back to the community. I went to school here. I lived here in the community. I have an office here on Minnesota Avenue. I always loved D.C., and just trying to give something back to the community of Ward 8 in this community or from around the country. We Act Radio, do something.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
The biofuel, sun, wind and sea, we can use to get energy. Stop using these fossil fuels. Hydropower, electricity rules. Biomass, geothermal energy, right type of energy for me. So everybody just hear my plea and come join this cause with me. We have the biofuel, sun, wind and sea, we can use to get energy. Stop using these fossil fuels. Hydropower, electricity rules. Biomass, geothermal energy, right type of energy for me. So everybody just hear my plea and come join this cause with me.
Our Mother Earth is dying.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese, we're talking about economic democracy.
And the transition to the new economy.
That's right, how to make it happen.
That's right. Our first guest was Gar Alperovitz, and our second guest was supposed to be Joel Magnuson.
But no one can find him. Hope he's
I know,
okay.
I hope he is okay. He just wrote a book called The Approaching Great Transformation Toward a Livable Post-Carbon Economy. If you can see that. What I wanted to do is read a piece of the book, if that's okay, since we don't have Joel actually here to talk about it. But this was the conclusion of one of his chapters. And he says, the question is not whether or not we will return to smaller, simpler, localized systems of production. A future without fossil fuels will make sure of that. The question is whether or not we can make those systems beautiful. And he talks about these meta-economists that are ascribing meaning to the word beautiful. He says, our great transformation of renewing our local economies and communities is the process of developing smaller-scale production systems that are community-based, values-based, and more democratically self-reliant, that are held together by a vibrant local culture that integrate aesthetic creativity with work skills and appropriate technology, that connects self-fulfillment with healthy lifestyles, and a revitalization of public life through local citizenship that defend human dignity and imagination, that provide economic stability and fairness by structuring ownership in the community and protecting people's livelihoods that are situated within the carrying capacity of their natural habitats. That's just amazing.
Well, it's a lovely view, and I hope that's the one that comes true. I mean, I think we have a lot of transitions to get to that view.
Yeah.
And, our friend Brian Wilson, also from Oregon, where Joel's from, talks about AWOL, the American way of life, and how that has to change. And it's and I think Joel talks about that too. He recognizes that the value of going green to going to a new energy economy.
Right.
But he also says that's not enough.
Well, exactly. I mean, basically, he talks about the 2,000 watt person is that if we want to be able to keep our energy usage within what we can create from renewable energy, we need to really scale down. And part of that can be done.
So that's a 2,000 watt person?
Yeah.
What kind of level person are we now?
We're about 4 times that.
Yikes.
So about 75% we need to cut back. But some of the things that we can do are, our energy infrastructure in this country is very inefficient. So if we move to a more efficient energy delivery system, and I know in Germany, maybe you want to talk a little bit about how the
FITS program.
Yeah.
Where they reward people for creating their own energy.
Growing energy.
Growing their own energy, creating their own energy, and to a point where they get a market price so that many people now are producing excess energy.
And this is through solar panels on their
solar
roof,
and wind,
windmills.
Putting it into the grid, and they're actually closing down nuclear plants.
Right.
As a result of that, and ending their coal, and so they're just totally transitioning to a clean economy because they've made it a market-based system. But I think that the AWOL issue, the American Way of Life issue, it's wasteful transition, movement of energy across power lines is one aspect, but it's also our land use planning. Mm-hmm. It seems like to me the most simple and basic changes that we could be making. We waste half the energy. You talk about going from a 10,000 watt to a 2,000 watt person. A lot of that is not the person's own use. Mm-hmm. A lot of that really is the system.
Yeah.
And if we, and if you create more efficient materials for the house, set up houses in ways that they're planned so that they waste less energy, so they heat themselves because the windows are in the right places, so they cool themselves because you can vent in the right places. Land use planning so you don't have to drive, but you can walk or bike in communities. This will be a better lifestyle for a lot of people too.
Right,
A lot of people don't like this sprawl lifestyle, but we drive these days and you see the sprawl continuing. These 1950s land use plans, you see these buildings going up that are not energy efficient, that are wasteful. Right. It's like rather than doing the simple things that could actually dramatically cut use, we're not doing those. And if we don't do those simple things first, then a green energy economy can't work because we're going to continue to need to have waste. And what that's going to mean is going to be tar sands.
Right.
That's going to mean hydrofracking. It's going to mean the hydro collection of uranium. It's going to mean all these dangerous offshore oil sources. If we don't do the obvious, which is change AWOL, then we're going to have to do the more dangerous, which is the extraction economy on steroids.
And, as we do our research, we just learn more and more how powerful the oil and gas industry is in this country and how much that shapes our public policy and how they exempt themselves from a lot of really important laws like the Clean Air
And it's still happening. It's not just the Clean Air Act of Work. That's the 1970s.
Right.
We're still happening now with the hydrofracking.
Right. Oh, yeah.
You were on a panel this weekend at the Left Forum where that was talked about.
Right, with Dr. Walter Sue from Pennsylvania. And the laws in Pennsylvania are completely in favor. I mean, they can actually even take people's land. If these hydrofracking companies are able to seize people's land and use them for fracking.
They get a certain percentage of properties to agree to it, and if someone else doesn't, they can take your land.
Right.
And they also can silence doctors. If you have a patient who is showing some kind of signs that may be caused by the fracking chemicals, and you go through the bureaucracy of the fracking company and finally get to find out what's in those, what chemicals your patient may be suffering from, you're not allowed to talk to anyone about it.
Right. So, like, if you're a family doctor or internal medicine doctor, and you don't have an expertise in that type of
environmental toxicology,
you can't go and consult an expert on that.
You can't tell them what toxins your patient may have been exposed to.
You can't even write it in the chart.
You can't write it in the chart.
Right, because that would be making it public.
I mean, it's so bizarre, the things they get away with.
Yeah, but so getting back to that, that's what that gives us is our instructions, which are that we can't sit back and wait for things to happen. It means that we have to actually make them happen. So in our local communities, pushing on our county, city, state legislatures to do the right thing, to put in place these systems that are public transportation systems land use planning. Those are the things that we're going to have to.
And what Subway overall has, if we do all that kind of stuff, it actually will revive the economy at least and create a foundation for a 21st century economy. We could even be talking about a full employment economy. We take that approach. You can also start talking about things like people working from home more, so there's less transit, less time wasted in cars, and I mean, there's so many benefits to these changes beyond just the energy issues and the AWOL issues. You can actually improve our lives.
Yeah, I mean, we publish a lot of articles, repost them on it'soureconomy.us, and there was one article that talked about when you changed like a market center, if you took the parking out and made it a pedestrian center, that it actually increased the amount of people that use that space.
By creating walkable, even also the bike sharing.
Yeah.
They've done research on that too that shows that bikeable and walkable actually increases people going out to restaurants, people going out to
the theater
because they don't. It's easier to get to. Exactly, the hassle factor reduces dramatically. So I think these changes could be positive changes, but they're going to be challenging changes.
Right.
And we're not really seeing the leadership. It's going to have to come from the grassroots to force this leadership. And our next two articles on Truth Out, we have articles each Wednesday. This week is going to be about strategy for change. How can we win?
Yeah.
I think what keeps a lot of people from joining the movement is they see it as futile. They see the system is too strong. We can't just defeat it. But I think that the history shows that's not really true.
Right.
And in fact, we base a lot of our work on this article this week about this from this book, Why Civil Resistance Works.
Right.
It's a 100-year history of resistance movements, both armed and unarmed, nonviolent and violent, and they compare and contrast and figure out what is the recipe that makes a resistance movement effective. And basically what it comes down to is nonviolence more effective than violent.
Right.
Mass movement is got the goal to mass movement, not a fringe movement, pulling people from the power structure. That means the students, that means labor, business, media, nonprofits, religious, civil servants, military and police, pulling them to our side to build the movement, and we can actually create the change we want to see.
Right.
And so people should be optimistic that we now have this history of 100 years of resistance efforts to learn from and put in place. And our second article will be about this issue of what can be done to create a new economy.
Right.
Because in addition to the political work, the economic work also has to go. And so the next two issues of our weekly column will go into a lot of detail about how to move this economy and move this government into a way that actually solves problems.
And it's exciting. A lot is happening. And I'll show this again because we showed it at the beginning of the show, this new OccuCard on public banks. We were just out in California for the Public Banking Conference, which was the second public banking conference in the United States. And the attendance at this one was triple what it was at the one a year ago. So there's real energy for these things to happen. And I think that when people know what it is that they can do, how they can plug in, then that will just accelerate it more.
Our time is out.
Our time is up. Our new website is popularresistance.org, where you can learn more about what you can do. And we're going out with our favorite song by Junkyard
Empire.
We want.
People organized.
Can build the kind of future we want.
The people together can overthrow the system. We got the love, uplift our brothers and our sisters. The people organized can build the kind of future we want.
This is Margaret Flowers.
And I'm Kevin Zeese. Join us every Monday morning, 11 a.m. for Clearing the Fog.
Speaking truth to expose the forces of greed.
Start the week with your eyes open.
The fog.
The forces of greed that spin news stories for the benefit of the 1%.
Each week, we feature guests who are working to expose these truths and offer real solutions to the current crises we face.
Knowledge is power, and with knowledge, you will be empowered to act to shift the power to the people.
Monday mornings at 11 a.m. on weactradio.com or 1480 AM.
We Act Radio, powered by Ethical Electric. Do something.
Hi, this is Chris Hedges, and when I'm in Washington, I don't want my news filtered through corporate sponsors. I want to hear the truth, which is why I listen to DC's only independent radio station, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC, Washington's progressive working community. We Act Radio, do something.
If you see things that really are not